Good evening. Welcome back to the Henry George School for Decarbonizing the Economy, Challenges and Prospects. This is the third and last session of this series, and tonight's instructor is Dr. Mario Roland. I see that he has a subtitle, Radical, Reasonable, Incremental Social Change.
Yeah.
Mario, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Appreciate everybody tuning in today. This is the third class of this course. It was something that Joe Polito, who's a frequent attendee to all these lectures, suggested that we do because he enjoyed the presentation at the United Nations Science Summit. So I came up with the title because these are the words that are probably best describing the content tonight. Radical, reasonable, incremental social change. So we're going to be talking about the move or the movement to decarbonize the economy, and I'm picking up on where we left off September 28th at that United Nations panel. The first class that Mike Morris from Ireland gave, he really got into the weeds of the difficulty and the costs of taking carbon out of the economy. And one of the big takeaways from his class was that it's not just the burning of the fossil fuels, it's the carbon that goes into all the chemicals that we use in our normal lives. So that's a big factor. And then Dan Sullivan was here a couple of weeks back talking about the climate alarmists and the climate deniers and some of the factors and why they say what they do, and maybe some characterizations. So I'm going to be repeating a little bit of what they say, but in a new way. So that's my my title slide. Let me go to the next one. Okay. Okay. Yeah, this was the second slide. This is the title slide that I used back in September 28th. Similar material, but I've added maybe about 10 or 15 slides. So the first one here, we all hear this phrase, there's no other way. And what I describe the position that we're in right now as a society, we're in a cultural inflection point. And during these cultural inflection points, we have elites tell us that there's only one way forward. You might recall some of these other inflection points, crises and such, that we have to do X, Y, Z, like the 2008 financial crisis. We have to bail out banks or whatever else that was that they told us. So the reason that there's no other way is that we have to do X, Y, Z, or else we're all going to die. And we hear similar things being said. For example, John Kerry, who's President Biden's climate czar, really going all out on attacks on agriculture, saying that there's so much CO2 being emitted with agriculture that it's going to destroy the planet. Well, you know, people do eat, and food does come from agriculture. So you have to wonder what the agenda is. So climate change is the perfect crisis. You know, we have crises, and the phrase is don't let a crisis go to waste. But climate change is a perfect crisis because it has no end, unlike 1890s when the U.S. Maine was sunk, starting the Spanish-American War, Vietnam War with the Gulf of Tonkin, two convenient lies that we're told. And then we have September 11th and October 7th, both crises that justified something. So the climate change is what I call a perfect crisis because it never ends. So the climate agenda I'm describing here, what I suggest that how it's different is that the lemmings aren't all jumping. What we see in this picture here on the right is some capitalist trying to hang on to the cliff because his system is faltering, and it's when we have these kind of crises that some other agenda happens to bring everything right. But I think people are waking up, and I call it the lemmings aren't all jumping. So this reminds me of the phrase that I recall fondly, where the Lone Ranger tells Tonto, his sidekick, Tonto, we're surrounded by 10,000 Indians. What are we going to do? And Tonto famously says, what do you mean we, white man? So that's the spirit that I'm presenting today. So what I'm offering as an alternative is what I call cooperative economics. It's a big category, but what I mean by cooperative economics is having a healthy dose of skepticism when you're asked to do something dramatic. Populations, I think it's very important to maintain and increase populations, as opposed to some advocates of climate change. Talk about, I think Jane Goodall famously said that we need to reduce population by 6 billion, kind of drastic. And then I like to give a shout out to Fred Harrison, who recently came out suggesting that we need to start looking at what he calls authentic democracy. So I would think that the material that I'm talking about tonight would fit kind of nicely within Fred's concept. Maybe not the exact same words, but I think that's a good description of what I'm trying to do today. But I think there's one more thing before we start that I wanted to point out, is that there's this thing called bait and switch, and it's something that people famously on Madison Avenue would do, the advertising execs. But no later than, say, 10 years ago, there was a concept called net zero energy. If you look up at the government, Sustainability Administration, you see that phrase even today. Net zero energy is what a building achieves when it balances energy needs with energy produced from on-site renewable zero emission sources. So the idea is that because it's so well insulated, so well tight in terms of drafts, that you don't need a lot of energy for the heating and cooling, and you can generate the energy for those things with solar collectors and maybe wind, maybe a green roof, or these kind of things. So compare net zero energy with what's going now, which is the phrase net zero. National Grid, which is a private company, says that it's the balance between amounts of greenhouse gases produced and amounts removed from the atmosphere. So this is a totally different thing from the net zero energy, but it kind of goes smoothly from one to the other, and people aren't paying close attention because the net zero energy is intuitively smart, because it's talking about what a person needs to do to balance his income and living situation in his own house. And now we're talking about a societal change that has drastic differences. So I'm going to be talking tonight also about this concept called the circular economy. I've been involved in discussions about how to write the standard for the international business community. But I suggest that we need to watch how this phrase morphs into a net zero call to action, just like net zero became what it is today. So let's begin the talk. And like I did back in September, Larry Fink from BlackRock first linked what's called ESG, which is environment, social governance, investing back in 2020, when he warned that climate change was fundamentally reshaping finance in his annual letter to CEOs. And in that letter, he argued that executives needed to reallocate their capital into sustainable strategies. The stance drew ire of coalition of conservative leaders, and he backed off a little bit, but what he was doing essentially was saying that in some cases we need to maybe make less profit if it's going to further the need for the environment and social and governance. So Fink says that BlackRock is not the environmental police, governmental policy. Well, not the environmental police, but governmental policy, technological innovation, and consumer preferences will ultimately determine the pace and scale of decarbonization. So this is important because that's the title of our talk tonight. But pay attention to what I just read here. We're going to revisit the statement. But thing to keep in mind is the passive nature of people like you and me being consumers, and it's our preference for the products that the people in charge, the elites, have to sell us, as opposed to being involved citizens involved in governmental policy. So it's a bias that I'm just pointing out. So rather than that intellectual person, I'd suggest that we look at these three intellectual heavyweights, because I use each of them in my ideas in my talk tonight. Of course, the first one is Henry George, who said that the world's resources belong to everyone, born and to be born. Nobody's labor created those resources. Those who have private land and other such resource privilege have an obligation to those without that privilege. Now, Elinor Ostrom may be less well known to those in the audience today, said there's more than two types of ownership. Something that if you follow any of the political parties in the United States, you'd be surprised, because typically the Republicans are always talking about private property, and Democrats are playing up the need for public things. So what Ostrom talks about is a common pool ownership as the alternative to those that dichotomy. Now, the common pool ownership has been around for millennia, sustainably and equitably caring for natural resources and other shared goods. It's a natural law that these goods and systems conform to a set of sharing principles. And then finally, Kate Raworth, who's still with us. She's relatively young. She sees an upper and lower bound within which humans safely interact with natural systems. She calls it a donut shape in her donut economics. The upper bound is the limit beyond which life itself is threatened, as with pollution, and the lower bound is the minimum below which humans cannot survive, let alone strive. So she has a concern for the environment, but it's not at the expense of people and populations. So I'm going to be talking about three propositions tonight, and weaving it together into a coherent conclusion. So the first proposition is the circular economy includes a manufacturing symbiosis of stocks and flows of minimal virgin, including fossil materials. But equally important, circular economy also includes an urban symbiosis, not only wise resource use, but also the equitable use and distribution of community-based and community-generated wealth in land value. The second proposition is the movement to a low-carbon economy must be at the behest and consent of an informed citizenry, lest life, societal transforming choices become a devolving series of authoritarian, best of equally bad alternatives. And then the third one is proper forestry can no longer be an afterthought or a private matter, but rather at the heart of a low carbon waste system of common pool resource management. And in this idea, pay attention to the fact that it's low carbon waste system, not getting rid of carbon. So it's carbon sequestering from trees, biodiverse habitat, water and air purifying environment, and safe from urban sprawl. So just to make it very clear what my position is, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations are all good. And in fact, what I'm going to be talking about tonight, I cover 7 of those, starting with poverty, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, infrastructure, reduced inequality, sustainable cities and communities, life on land, and then finally the partnership for the goals. So there's nothing wrong with the United Nations development goals. I think they're good to organize thoughts and programs and policies. So let's start off with the first proposition about manufacturing symbiosis. What am I talking about? I got a series of slides here to talk about what manufacturing symbiosis. Essentially, we're in the manufacturing realm where we're producing products, and in the low carbon environment, we're looking to produce products that are just as good, but having a lower impact, so-called, on the environment. And this is the first of 4 graphs that are important to understand. They're not that difficult once you work it through. So let me take on the y-axis here, where we go from birth at the top to end of life. And then on the x-axis, we have something newly produced to waste and raw material. So if you look at the line that's having this regression from the left to the right, what you see is the beginning of a product, a manufacturing product. And this is describing a life cycle continuum, where the product at any point in its life cycle is going up and down this line. So the first arrow on top, remanufactured or low carbon. So you may need a replacement part, and the idea in a decarbonizing economy would be to choose the part that can be made with lower amounts of carbon, therefore producing less CO2 to the atmosphere. So the arrow on the bottom is product disassembled, components replaced, expired content disposed. So you're always going up and down this line. And then the the arrow to the right here is scavenged parts for remanufacturing. So what you're describing here is always keeping manufacturing products available, looking for opportunities to produce products that have a lower impact on the CO2 in the atmosphere. So one of the things that the circular economy is not focused on, I tried my hardest to have this in the standard for circular economy. Even though they had a manufacturing symbiosis, they didn't entertain the idea that there's such a thing as an urban symbiosis. But if you you see here the high-speed train here that in some progressive city, but in the urban symbiosis, we have a thing called tangible infrastructure. Things such as transit and travel, water supply, sewage and wastewater, buildings, power, communications, waste disposal, cultural heritage, recreation, entertainment, and nature. So these are all the tangible infrastructure, natural infrastructure, assets, things that a modern city, a progressive city, would make sure that the citizens have or have a reasonable access to an affordable amount of these things. So just like we had in the previous diagram, we got figure 2, where we talk about tangible urban infrastructure, also a life cycle continuum, but rather than a individual part that goes into something else, we have the birth and the end of life, same as the other one. But this one, we have the start of the cycle, and then construction, demolition, debris, materials recovery. So it's the same kind of process where we have increasing maintenance and operating costs. This is true if you are familiar with anything like buildings and transit and other things that wear out. We're always having crews out fixing those kind of things. But on the top, you have this expansion, net zero energy, low carbon retrofit, perhaps incorporation of a urban system into a metropolitan system. And that's how you economize by going out to what may used to be a suburban area, and you provide the types of services that you can afford because of a higher density of population. The other arrow on the lower right, implementing alternate services plan, making the final years of a system productive. So just like the other one, you're moving up and down this diagram or this line, improving and taking care of generating the revenue you need to pay for improved services. So this is the first diagram for the urban symbiosis. So let's now talk about something that's a little bit less, maybe less reported, less understood, because I think most people understand that, power and transit and those kind of things, those are hard things. Now we're talking about intangible infrastructure, intangible assets. And here you see a picture probably from Pakistan, would be my guess. Security, maybe fire protection. Everybody's happy because somebody did a good thing or something didn't blow up. So urban symbiosis, security, fire and police, healthcare, food safety, education, financial system. So you might wonder, well, why are these intangible? Aren't there hospitals in healthcare? Aren't there food and drug buildings? Aren't there schools? Well, the thing that makes these intangible is that they're all based on trust and the intelligence of the people providing these. Of course, they use things that are tangible, but the service that they're providing is intangible, including financial systems you set up and you operate so that you do have funding, that you don't run out of money and have to choose between eating and doing something else. So in the third diagram, describing this intangible urban infrastructure, we have a little bit different on the y-axis here, where we're talking about higher per capita expense and lower expense. So you're going up and down this this line here, going from higher per capita expense, lower. And then the start of a cycle, then periodic performance review. So what you're doing, you're making sure that your intangibles are providing what it is that you need. This diagram would probably blow a fuse to most conservatives, because there's this mantra about how we need to reduce the size of government. This is not necessarily overblowing the size of government, but it's making the right size of government for what you decide that you need and can afford. So that's the difference between, let's say, this and the other diagrams. So if you look at the upper part of the diagram, you got incremental economic, environmental, social change. You might reevaluate a mission. For example, during COVID, we didn't have any respirators. We didn't have the personal protective equipment, all these other things. I think nowadays, if we had a smart city agency, we would have a reserve of things that might be important if we had another pandemic. But one of the things to keep in mind is that there's going to be increasing pension costs if you're going to have a well-paid and intelligent and capable city employees providing these intangible services that require trust. Then the lower right arrow, major institutional change to assure cost-effective, green, low-carbon, equitable governance. So you have periodic reviews. You're looking at, are we really achieving the ends that we need? Should we do things differently? Should we increase staffing? Should we reduce it? Should we introduce new technologies? Those kind of things. So next one, and we're getting to the end of the complicated diagrams. So if you look at the photo here, any Georgist would say, oh yeah, that's an example of underutilized land. And that's exactly why I put it here. Another example of urban symbiosis. In this case, the line is going from the lower to the upper, increasing. And again, the y-axis has changed, where we're talking about public revenue being generated. And so you have the difference between what might be called baseline to something that's increasing. And then on the x-axis, we see split rate property tax, land value only tax, and then periodic land assessment. So this is the three types of movement up and down this line here, where we try to increase the public revenue based on land values. So by changing from a split rate property tax to a land value only, we're increasing the acreage back onto the tax rolls, because we're taking taxes off of buildings and putting the tax on land. And And then the other diagram, we expand the amount and the quality of the tangible and intangible services. So this diagram pulls all the other three into focus, because what you're doing in this diagram is demonstrating where the money is going to come from for the higher pensions, for increased maintenance and those kind of things. You get it from land value, which is the Henry George solution. So the three propositions. So that was all about infrastructure, circular economy. So it's important that if we are going to be going to a low carbon economy, it's not going to be because somebody from the World Economic Forum said that's the best way that we're going to get there. I suggest that it's going to be at the behest and the consent of an informed citizenry. And what does that mean? Well, it means somebody such as this woman from Louisiana, apparently, getting up and telling people what she thinks and has an opinion about where we need to be for the urban government that she's describing. But any type of management system, people who are familiar with these kind of things understand this diagram called plan, do, check, act. This is how you plan to take an action according to some kind of policy or diagram or description. Then you do maybe a test case of implementing something that might be new. And then the important step, which is you check, did you leave something out? Was the pilot test done in good faith? And then the fourth step is act. So plan, do, check, act. And that's how you implement continuous improvement. Now, one of the things I'm going to be discussing in a second here is a standard practice that I helped produce called the infrastructure management system. The important point of this, we talk about at the behest and the consent of an informed citizenry. So by following this management system, the authority, who might be the mayor, maybe the governor, somebody in authority, they seek citizen stakeholder consent, periodic performance reviews. We look at the public revenues and the outlays. And importantly, there's going to be two public meetings. The second one after the citizens had a chance to digest the impacts and the costs. So you're probably familiar that most public meetings have maybe one meeting where you're presented something new, maybe controversial. At the end of that one meeting, that's it. That you had your opportunity to complain, but you're never given the opportunity to really understand it. So this is why this standard practice has two, with the idea that if the authority doesn't perform, you just elect a new one. And a description of the continuous improvement cycle is that you look at what you're doing, you get the year's worth of data, and then you fix what's broke, and you introduce new technology, and then you perform at a higher quality. So going into the circular flows, I think everybody can understand the simplistic nature of a circular material flow, where you have say virgin materials coming in from the top, going into production use. You have circulation, and what you try to do is remove materials that are still usable through this circular flow, and have a very a linear economy disposal step. where you can't get anything more out of your materials. What I suggest is that there's something that's equally and probably more important than the circular material flow. Rather, there's a circular urban wealth flow. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about here. The shaded area in this diagram that has the authorities, revenue, and the infrastructure, and that arrow with the C on it. Three standards that are available, ISO 55000, the E3210 that I just described, and then the 37120, which is called the Sustainable Cities and Communities. That one provides performance data that would be identifying a good way of moving forward. So the shaded area denotes the provisioning. So we have funds, the city spends the money on infrastructure. And then what happens is urban land values increase because you're taking care of things. You're providing the goods and the services that people expect and deserve because they're citizens. So going from the urban land value then down to where the new revenue is generated, and this kind of goes back to that fourth diagram where revenue is being generated with the land value tax. So what this diagram is showing is that you build the infrastructure, the land value goes up, total land value increases citywide. And then if you properly assess a land value tax, let's call it A, and if that is what goes to the infrastructure, 100% of the land value tax is going to where it needs to go. So the question is, what is land value return? Well, the return is just that portion that's the land value tax over B when the C is equal to A. So what does that all mean? Well, what I haven't described is what's typically done in urban areas and other places is that they tax labor and they tax capital, which makes things inefficient and makes it so that we have less resources going to labor and less resources to the capitalist so that he can conduct his enterprise. So if we reduce those taxes and rely 100% on land value tax, we reduce poverty, we spur production and increase employment. So we going into the last proposition where we talk about forestry. And let me pose this question here. Low carbon use, is it more about social control than concern about the environment? We do a little calculation here, and I'll be making a point that where are we on this equation here about what tree coverage does in terms of sequestering carbon. So man-made CO2 emissions are about 37 billion tons. China emits around 31%, the United States about a third of that. At the Q&A, I'll give somebody a bonus point if they can tell me what this photo is. But methane is emitted naturally and in production, transport, and the use of natural gas. So they have a thing called equivalent CO2 because the methane acts like CO2, but it's a little bit more productive. So there's the number there, around 14 billion tons going into the atmosphere. Then the number of mature trees worldwide is around 3.25 trillion, each sequestering an average of around 50 pounds of CO2 each year. So theoretically, there's 71.5 billion tons of CO2 being sequestered every year. But we can't forget about the oceans. Oceans hold 150 times more CO2 per unit volume than air, estimated at around 11 billion tons of CO2 per year. So you do the math, and what you see is that there's around 32 billion tons extra CO2 being sequestered by trees. Yet we hear reports that the atmospheric CO2 concentration continue to increase. So what's going on here? Trees are not where the CO2 is being emitted. That's a possibility. Maybe the tree estimate is inflated because of wildfires, clear cutting, and tree plantations. Maybe the sequestering capacity is inflated. An important point that I've been making for several months now is that there's annual meetings. In fact, there's one going on right now with the COP28. World leaders pledging to reduce CO2 emissions, but there's no such meetings to pledge afforestation. So it's why not? And I suggest that perhaps the climate agenda is about social control rather than environmental issues. Things to keep in mind and make real what I just said is that the Canadian wildfires in 2 months this year emitted 1.5 billion tons of CO2, and this is 3 times what Canada emits every year from burning fossil fuels. Brazilian rainforests are a net emitter of CO2. You would expect that the largest rainforest in the world might be a net sequester of CO2, but it's not. And then we have this example that nobody knows about, nobody that I talk to. Romanian national forests are being chopped down to supply renewable energy to these various Eastern and Western European countries. So 306 square miles out of the 1,100 square miles of remaining forests have been chopped down. Then in addition to that, you have 31 square miles of forests in North Carolina and Virginia are chopped down and sent to Europe so they can heat their homes. And then consider that 3% of all trees on the earth, which is a half million square mile, are in industrial forest plantations. And then 70% of those get state subsidies. So on the one hand, people are concerned about emissions, and on the other hand, they're not concerned about emissions because of the subsidies going to chop down trees. There is a nascent effort underway to create tiny forests, and it's something that I'm working with somebody from the Asset Leadership Network, where the soil conditions and other factors are measured to ensure an effective canopy for all the reasons why you need forests. And perhaps once all tiny forests and vegetated spaces are under a monitoring regime, perhaps some truth will be revealed about the CO2 balance. That's something that's going on. But I think it's odd that we would build a carbon removal machine while we subsidize the removal of natural methods of doing the same thing. I think this proves that trees are severely underpriced. Can we defossilize chemicals and materials? Fact or fiction? Just like Mike Morris had to say, we probably can decarbonize, but what's going to be the impact? What's going to be the cost? What are we not going to have because we go down that path? If CO2 emissions are causing a warming planet, what part do human-caused emissions play? And I have to say that there is an open debate about the percent of CO2 emissions from human cause. A lot more scientists are coming out and saying that the climate agenda is faulty. I think I'm going to skip this slide. This is really just about an effort in New York City about going all electric on your domestic stoves and such. It's not really that important, but it's just bringing home a local angle. So we are going to be finishing up here in the next few slides here, returning to Larry Fink, where he says that BlackRock is not the environmental police. Government policy, technological innovation, consumer preferences is what's going to determine the pace of the scale of decarbonization. But to notice that he leaves out citizen taxpayer demand and willingness to do that. And this is the rallying call, I suppose, I'm giving in this presentation, that we need to be vigilant. BlackRock, this is coming from the head of a company that would control the air we breathe and sell it if it could, which is really not much different from buying up single-family homes and apartments and leasing or selling them at inflated prices. The question is, where's the intergenerational wealth that's not being created by taking that step to keep people from their initial purchase of a home so they don't have to rent? Nationwide, institutional investors such as BlackRock own around 4% of the 15 million single-family rentals. In Charlotte, North Carolina, it's a little bit more inflated. It goes from 4% up to 20%. And the big question is, doesn't BlackRock and other investors have an obligation to others than what they're doing with their purchasing of these homes? So that was the presentation. Those are all the slides I had. Ibrahim, I'm ready to answer any questions that people might have.
Thank you very much, Marty. I think this was a very interesting presentation with tons of great graphics. I'm going to open now it to the audience. If you have any questions, use the reaction button to raise your hand and I'll call you. I don't see anybody raising their hands. Marty, if you don't mind, I could just ask you one question.
Sure, no, that's great.
Okay, so the question that I have is, when we talk of decarbonization, we are not talking only of policy that is happening at the national level. You know, it's something that has to happen globally. So for the measures to be effective, we're gonna have to have all those countries that are the biggest emitters of the gases that cause the climate change itself to be part of the framework. So what do you see, what kind of challenge do you see in having all those big countries being together, especially understanding the economic interests that are at stake? What chances do we have for achieving such a global consensus? It's a very broad question, but I want to just have your opinion on it.
No, I think it's good that you brought it up, because it hits home to the reality of what we're talking about when people are advocating decarbonizing the economy. China, India, I think Russia, and other developing countries besides those countries, they're building new coal plants. They're essentially ignoring the international call for decarbonizing. It kind of brings a stark relief to well, in whose interest is it that we do these things? We could hurt ourselves economically, and if we impact our source of food, like John Kerry is suggesting, we're actually making ourselves vulnerable to people that may not want our best interests at heart. We always concerned about the dominance of maybe Iran or China or Russia. So we have to really question, why is it that we're doing this? And if it really that the world's going to come to a screeching halt if we don't reduce CO2, I think we need to be a little bit more skeptical of that that theory. So to answer your question is, we're not going to achieve a decarbonizing environment if the other major polluters of CO2 aren't on board. I think probably should really have a reassessment of this charade that happens every year with the COP 28, and next year is going to be 29. What exactly is the agenda? So we're not going to get there unless there's some reality. And I think we need to really look at the science of climate change. Really needs to look at the historic record of what we had, let's say in the Roman warm period before there was the little ice age, and it appears from the experts that I've read that we're actually coming out of a period where it was a lot cooler, so that it's really not that surprising to have the increasing in temperatures that we're having. And the other point that I'm finding out about is that the side with the climate agenda are saying that it's CO2 that's causing the warming, but there's evidence that actually the Earth is warming, and then the warming is actually increasing the CO2. So for us to be making drastic changes, I think we need to get the science in a healthy debate and move forward based on that. Did we get any new questioners?
Yes.
Good.
Joe?
Hi, Marty. Thanks so much. That was very interesting. I would, if before asking my question, I would suggest that one thing that might happen that overcomes that problem you just mentioned about slowness to adapt and continuing to build coal plants and so forth. One thing that might happen, I think is happening, is that the renewables, the clean energy, is becoming cheaper than the dirty energy. And that should help us move faster. It saves money, right? The market's working. More seem to be adopting carbon taxes, which has the same effect. In Canada, they relied on the carbon taxes, and then they saw Biden investment in more efficient renewables, and I think there's been some move toward mimicking that strategy. I don't know if in the States you can mimic the carbon tax. Maybe locally, maybe statewide, I don't know, but that's a problem. In Canada, it's become kind of a nationwide thing with bills worked out.
Yeah. Well,
states. But so hopefully, cross your fingers that that will accelerate, and that concern you cited will be overcome. I certainly agree with you on the trees. My question is, you mentioned, you just did a slight comment there about social control or something like that, and I just wondered what you had in mind when you said that. Thanks.
Well, I think right. The most alarming thing to me is perfectly sane people, I thought, like Jane Goodall, saying that the world needs to decrease its population by 6 billion. If we said that we should take all the people of a certain culture or religion and reduce their population by 6 billion, I'm sure that there'd be some alarm but a person such as that can say that, and it's like, oh well, maybe she's true, or maybe it's true what she's saying. And then John Kerry talking about how we need to radically reform our agricultural industry to reduce CO2. Well, we need to look at what's the effect of doing these things. Of course, if you're the person being eliminated, that's a real big deal. But looking at is there enough food to eat? So, some of those ideas that are being advocated, I call it social control, because it's like, oh yeah, let's go down this path that this guy is talking about. But yeah, what exactly are we trading off here? So anytime I hear anything coming out the World Economic Forum, it makes me back up and say, what's the agenda here? So that's the social control aspect. I don't think I've heard anything that's reasonable from that organization. Well, maybe they are advocating something. You bring up the point of the cost effectiveness of the solar and other energy. That was really the point of the zero or net zero energy, is that you put solar, let's say, on buildings, and then the solar would pay for the heat pump that is all that you would need when you properly insulate and make air tightness on your building. So there's really smart things that people can do with solar and other types of energy, but to reduce the CO2 for some theory that doesn't seem to be holding up, seems to be kind of a ill-advised.
I remember hearing that thing about Jane Goodall a long time ago, and I checked it out, and apparently she was misinterpreted.
Okay.
I hope what I read was correct.
Okay. Well, I hope that it wasn't like, oh, she wants 5 billion, not 6.
I don't know. I think it was just a kind of a misinterpretation of what she said in terms of
Okay. Well,
resources and population source. And as far as the WEF is concerned, I have seen stuff from them which seem to be concerned about climate change. And I'm pretty sure I saw some stuff from them on housing and land value tax too.
okay. Well,
I think. So hopefully my memory is correct on that too. I just sort of vaguely remember that, but I I was pleased, I think, at the time to see that they had something on
yeah.
land value tax as well.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example of somebody who is writing for the World Economic Forum, a guy named Guy Standing. He came out very much in favor of Elinor Ostrom and how people should be using things communally and such. But then he turns out that people themselves, the lowly citizen, they shouldn't themselves own something community. Rather, the government should own it, kind of like going back to the King John the Third during the forest charter system, where it's all kind of like patronizing. So it's like this writer tries to get your attention and support by quoting Ostrom and doing things communally, but then it's like putting it into a regime where somebody's got control over how the community's resources are going to be shared, rather than what Ostrom was really talking about. But yeah, I think before I make another presentation, I think I'm going to do a little bit more research on Jane Goodall and maybe identify some of the things that maybe the World Economic Forum may have said that something is true. But, it's kind of like the broken clock thing about being correct twice a day. But
My wife says that about me all the time. Anyways, while you were chatting, I just took a quick look at my phone, and it says says the housing crisis, land value tax incentives incentivize landlords to improve their land has been shown to boost housing supply. So it's a note in, because I remember I was looking for articles on land value tax quite some
yeah,
time ago, and there
but
it was. And
yeah, but if
as
you
you
think
say, they can put things in a way which puts them in a better light. But I was quite see that.
yeah, the thing I'd have to say is that the Henry George School of Social Science will have failed miserably if people get their opinions about land value tax from the World Economic Forum. So,
Yeah, I don't think you have to worry about that.
yeah. So we need to be, clear advocates of not only of the land value taxation, but the equitably producing, distributing wealth and all the good benefits from that, rather than picking a topic that might sway a population in a certain way.
Right. Thanks again, Marty.
Okay. Appreciate all those questions. That's great.
I saw Alana raising her hand, but not anymore. Alana, you still have
Okay, I have a bad connection and I put a lot of comments and questions in the chat. If Ibrahima might read through my comments on the chat.
We can hear you very well, Alana. You don't have a connection problem anymore.
Well, if I go unstable, which I think I am, if you could look at the chat.
Well, give us your best question. Well, maybe she's got a solar powered connection.
Yeah, I don't see a question here. I see, okay, a suggestion actually.
Comments.
Okay.
Chat, in the chat.
Yeah, Marty is suggesting you add participatory budget into your citizen engagement process. That's all I see here.
No, there's like 8 comments in there I made. Scroll up.
Yeah,
Scroll up to the top of the
plenty
comments.
of time. We got plenty of time to discuss each of those.
Yeah, scroll up to the comments to everyone. And
I'm
you just
sorry,
scroll up in the chat.
I don't see them. Maybe you send them directly to Marty.
Well, can somebody else see them in the chat that you can read? I said climate change is not settled. Financing is key. I'm glad you're looking at the sustainable government SDGs.
Yeah,
I don't
need
see
to look
anything.
at proper.
Yeah, this is Wayne. I don't see anything in chat.
Well, she sent them directly to Marty. Only Marty can see them.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Let me see if I can open them. It says no chat is empty. Yeah, I don't have anything. So maybe just from memory, maybe Alana, you could tell us what the questions are. Or if there's somebody else that's got a question, we could wait for Alana to come back.
Okay.
Mhm.
Basic, tell us again why CO2 is bad as it grows plants which produce oxygen.
Yeah, well, CO2 is plant food, so CO2 is not bad.
But that's what the whole climate thing is. The elites are saying we've got to reduce CO2.
Yeah, that's what they're saying. Yeah. So,
So
the question is whether the CO2 is the cause or maybe the effect of a warming planet. I think there's a lot of discussion about that now.
that is key, and it's been warming for 100 years.
Yeah.
And the inner planets are all warming.
Yeah.
So I agree, Marty. It seems
Well, the little ice age ended in 1850, so definitely the world has been increasing in temperature since 1850.
yeah. So then the whole thing is a plan for control.
Yeah, I guess that's, see, when I say skeptic, it's like, well, don't believe me. Maybe we should come together as a community and say, you know, well, maybe we are having this big challenge. What is it that we need to do? You know, I just have this uh, funny feeling that there's somebody saying that I've got the answer to all this. You guys just need to put all your concerns away and go back to your video games and whatever else you do, sport.
Ex-
I think we lost Alana, Marty.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway, it's 7:37. That's 7 minutes past the time.
yeah. Well, you
Uh,
know, if people have questions or anybody else, but I guess to get back to Alana, when I do get her comments, what we'll do is I'll write up a response and then send it to everybody.
Sounds good.
So any other questions? It's been a lot of fun. Well, I guess maybe in closing, I just wanted to say probably the most important part of this presentation tonight was those 4 charts, because it really puts into perspective what it is an informed citizenry would be doing. You know, rather than somebody saying, we need to do X, Y, and Z, they say, well, we'll hold off here. Let's understand the impacts of what it is that the people are suggesting we do, and let's hold high the various urban infrastructure systems that we all need, like water and sewer and transit and all these, how that all fits together. Yeah, I just don't like somebody saying go off in this direction without a full discussion of the impacts and alternatives.
the need to localize this. Localize, I think, is a key, and that's where our land value tax
Yeah.
really comes in.
Yeah, actually, I was on Twitter today, and there's a woman said that she was going to attend tonight, and she was wanting to know the interplay between MMT and land value tax. And what I was going to say is that MMT might have a lot of good effect on the national economy, where we need to invest in large scale things. But the importance about land value taxation and return and recycle is that it disciplines that local level, that you're reducing the inequality of wealthy landowners to have their way. So having the land value tax, it kind of evens everything out, even though some MMTers will say, well, no, we don't need the land value tax. We'll just generate new currency. And I say, well, no, that you're missing the point on what the land value taxation actually does. It democratizes. It brings people together on what it is that we want and how we're going to pay for it, and who benefits, and who's going to live next year. So, yeah, appreciate the comments. We'll get all the comments that you have, and I'll answer them.
Good.
Marty, I put a link to a Jane Goodall thing I found when
Okay,
you
what you say?
were chatting. I also put in one about the land value tax, but it appears that not the entire link was hot. You sort of have to complete it, or you can just do a search on it. But that was there as well, and there were several. So hopefully the WEF is getting the message.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay,
You're
well,
welcome.
I'll read what she had to say, and and then maybe I'll adjust. I think everybody who's a Georgist should know that Henry George had no problem with an increasing population. And anybody who
Correct.
flies from New York to Seattle will see all this empty land.
Yeah,
And-
hey Marty.
I'm sorry?
Marty, hi, it's Tom.
John?
Yeah, so just to kind of give a little historical perspective here. So you know, in the late 1960s, it was very popular on the left, on the environmentalist left, to talk about population and what a problem, the overcrowding problem, and then the Club of Rome in 1973 and 74 published a big report. Paul Ehrlich, I think it's 1968, 69, he wrote The Population Bomb. So this idea of overpopulation and resource constraint has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
It's not a new thing.
No, it's important. Yeah. So they've been at it a long time. And our military industrial complex accommodates that opinion very well.
And it's a major polluter.
Yeah.
Talk about, they never mentioned the militarization as a climate change problem.
Yeah. Another thing that I didn't mention is that I think it would be great if we could reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are burned. I know that people in the Bronx would breathe a lot easier if they didn't have all that diesel soot coming off of the Major Deegan and Cross Bronx Expressway and I-95, and so cleaner energies are important. Maybe so if that's the problem, what's the solution? And the solution might be transit, might be electric vehicles, but so I'm not a big lover necessarily of the fossil fuel industry. It's just what do people need, and how are we going to move society to where common people have a say?
Marty, would you be willing to advocate vegetarianism?
What's that?
I gather that a huge amount of our carbon is produced by saving tons of animals and kind of an unnatural population of animals in order to have meat.
Yeah, well, I'm not ready to give up steak.
But I think the issue is land use and how we can have grazing animals in smaller farms.
Okay, well, that might make sense.
Higher quality, good meat, and not the CAFOs, the confined animals.
Yeah. No, that's you only have to see one image of the
How would that
sewage ponds collapsing in the Carolinas.
how would that affect the price of meat, Alana, if what you are suggesting?
Let the price be a bit higher, but let
Okay.
other costs go down, like
Okay.
like housing costs will go down with land value tax, the mortgage payments. People will have increased purchasing capacity for higher quality food. But also, land value tax shift actually supports smaller farms rather than corporate farming. There's many reasons why the tax shift will drive regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, it's kind of like, let's do the math and let's
Do the math.
evaluate it rationally, and one of the things that we need to do immediately is to stop foreigners coming in and depleting our groundwater aquifers. And I've got a background in groundwater hydrology, and I just shake my head every time I hear about aquifers being pumped to where pumped dry, and they're making like alfalfa, and then the alfalfa is being sold by these foreigners, even though they're stealing our groundwater. It totally makes no sense.
Is that water, are the royalties charged for that water?
Well, there's a thing called fossil water, and in Africa and Libya, for example, there's a lot of fossil water. It rained there like maybe 500,000 years ago, and unless the climate changes, there's not going to be that water being replaced. All these things can be discussed rationally and solutions put forward, but when it comes to, well, somebody's got to make a buck at it, I think we need to keep them outside of the meeting room.
Yes.
I was just thinking that kind of the Georgist approach, or the Pagovian tax approach could be used with the water too, and have much higher royalties on that to prevent or discourage what you object to.
Yeah, well, first you have to identify what's fossil water and what's renewable. And if you look at the distribution of water in the United States, anywhere where you have like the Mississippi River, Missouri, and Ohio River, you've got massive amounts of water stored below in sand aquifers. As you go west, of course, there's still water to be had, but it's like if you want to do something rational, you would do something where the water is plentiful and you improve people's lives. Let's say on the other side of Memphis in Mississippi, maybe that's a good place where future cities should be. You're never going to run out of water next to the Mississippi River. But those are all good questions. Did you have more, Alana, that you wanted to write to me?
Yes, I do. I think this is such an important conversation. I'd like to organize another event, if you will, for other groups that I'm working with your presentation.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. You might give them a copy of this, and then we could, fashion the discussion around maybe several speakers.
Well, at least yourself. I mean, this is quite sufficient. But then also everyone know on March 19th at the Henry George School, we're in the early stages of planning an Equinox Earth Day seminar all day event. So I would hope Marty and others could speak at that as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm always available. You're doing good work.
Right.
Well, I learned today that we're going to host like the finance minister of Norway at the school. Is that true?